Okay, so we're learning, it's a long mimer. So we're learning the mimer of Pesach. I'm going to skip through parts of it. Let's bring up the mimer here. There we go. Okay, so we're discussing the mimer is going to discuss the question of the matzah, meaning just a basic question of why do we eat the matzah? Is it because the Jewish people, when they left Egypt, ate matzah with their Pesach sacrifice before leaving Egypt, or because when they left Egypt, they didn't have enough time for the bread to rise, and therefore we eat matzah? So we seem to see two ideas that were brought down when the Jewish people left Ariel left Egypt. And what's the reason we eat matzah tonight? Meaning tonight, the night of Pesach. So lahavin, to understand Masha Omrim B'Haggadah, the question we have is about this, that it says in the Haggadah, matzah zu, this matzah, meaning we're sitting at the Haggadah and we're asking a question, why do we eat this matzah tonight? Shaנו Oichlim Mashuma, why do we eat this matzah? So we answer the question in the Haggadah, Al Shum Shlai Hispik Ki Garshu, that the Jewish people didn't have time to make bread because they were rushed out of Egypt. And therefore, the time that the bread didn't have time to rise. So therefore, as a memory of that, we eat matzah today. So the Rebbe asked a question, the mashma, ha ilu loy garshu, meaning to say, had they not had to run out of Egypt, the hispik lahachmitz, and they're able to, for the bread to rise, to become leaven, then we would eat chametz. How could you say that? The Torah already tells us when Moshe Rabbeinu was instructed by Hashem about the laws of Passover, Moshe is told, it says, Be'esel HaChodesh, on the 10th of the month, they're supposed to take the sheep, and then when they eat the sheep, matzah is yachlu, they eat the matzah with the maror. And so this was told to the Jewish people to eat matzah before they left Egypt. It has nothing to do seemingly with the fact that the bread didn't rise. But Gam L'Dairis and Stav, also in the Parsha, when it talks about the obligation that the Jewish people should have for the Korban Pesach for the generations to come, it says clearly, Shivas Yamim Sa'ar Le'Matzeh. For 7 days, leaven can't be found in your house. In all your places of rest, all the places that you live, you should eat matzahs. So clearly the Torah talks about eating matzahs. It seemingly has nothing to do with the fact that the Jewish people rushed out of Egypt and the bread didn't have time to rise. And the Rebbe asked a question on the verse itself. The only reason we eat matzah today is as a memory of what happened in Egypt. When it comes to Egypt, there was only the day of the 14th when they ate the Korban Pesach, they weren't allowed to have chametz, but there was no concern for chametz for the 7 days. So why for 7 days don't we eat chametz? We don't eat leaven. Chametz is leavened bread. Kedisa Gemara, as the Gemara discusses this in the tractate of Pesachim. So the idea is like this. What we're going to go into understand, the Rebbe is going to explain what is the idea of matzah, and what's the general idea of matzah, and what's the idea of matzah when the Jewish people left Egypt, and why didn't the Jewish people, when they left Egypt, have to be concerned about the rising of the bread? And the only reason they didn't eat leavened bread when they left Egypt is because they were rushed out. But today we do have a concern for 7 days to eat leavened bread. So the idea is like this. The Pesach Mitzrayim, the idea taka, that Pesach Mitzrayim was 1 day. Therefore, the only reason they didn't eat chametz when they left Egypt from when they left basically till they entered by the splitting of the Red Sea, which was on Shvisha Pesach, because they were rushed out. And therefore they ate matzah the days of Pesach. Nevertheless, for us, the reason why we don't eat chametz for 7 days is a memory of when the Jewish people left Egypt. Meaning to say that there's something that the concern of chametz was a concern 1 day. And that's why they eat matzahs with the Korban Pesach on the 14th. That concern wasn't a concern for that specific time, but the same concern now remains for the 7 days for the Jewish people, for the generations when we celebrate and remember the exodus of Egypt. So the Rebbe says like this. So to understand all this, we have to understand what's the idea of matzah. What is the idea spiritually that we eat matzah? It's a very long mimer. We're not going to get to the end of it, so we're going to try to skip through to get to the understanding of the matzah. So first, to understand matzah, we have to understand the holidays. What is the deal? The holidays are called moyadim l'simcha, times of happiness. Sheikra ha-moyadim hu b'chinas ha-simcha. The main idea of the holidays is that these are times of happiness. Like it says clearly in the verse, you should be happy in your holidays. What's the cause for the happiness? Happiness is not just when you say this is just times for happiness, it's not a time that person sits down and says, okay, now I'm going to be happy. There has to be a reason, something that causes the happiness. So what's the cause for that? Because during the holiday is a revelation of what's called the mother intellect, the female intellect, or the mother intellect, which that yields happiness. This is why we say the Hallel on Yom Tiv. And what do we say in the Hallel? Maishivi Akeres Abayis. The Akeres Abayis is the woman of the house. Eim Habanim, the mother of her sons, Smeichem was happy. So happiness is to the mother of her children. The children give happiness to the mother. So therefore, the idea of moichin de'ima, what is moichin de'ima means is we're going to learn is a lower level of happiness, something that is understood, even though it's been watered down, so to say, or contracted, so we can understand it because it's not above our understanding. But because we can understand it, the understanding yields happiness. That's what it means. Eim habanim, the mother of the children, she understands the midos, she understands what's happening. Therefore, she's happy. But however, Shabbos we don't find simcha. Why? Because Shabbos there's a high revelation. It's a revelation of the Father intellect, which is Chachma, and that's too high for us to grasp. It's too coded, so to say. Chachma is still coded, and therefore it doesn't give happiness. Because if you don't understand it, you're not happy. It's a higher level of revelation. Therefore, it doesn't yield the happiness like holidays does. So seemingly the happiness in holidays is because of a lower level or a brought down level of understanding that gives us happiness. The idea is like this. What is the idea of the mother intellect? There's two types of ways the infinite light reveals itself. Aleph, the first way, is bechinis ishtalshus v'seder madregas, how things go orderly. Ishtalshus means the chain. One link is connected to the next. So it's hanging and relying on the higher link. So it's levels. It goes from cause to effect. Ha'ara va'ara da'ara, ray to ray. From shal, for example, seichel, an intellect, an intellectual idea of Amidas, how it gives life to the emotions, right? When a person can understand logically why they're responding to something. So when you understand something, that yields an emotional response. So that's a chain of reaction. Although the intellect is higher than the emotion, but the intellect causes the emotional reaction. And from the midas, and because you feel a certain way, is why you think about something. Machshava goes into your thinking process. So again, everything's going in an orderly way. The whole idea of a chain reaction. This is when something, a higher something, creates a lower something. And as it gets lower, it goes through and is experienced through the different ways of experiencing it. You experience it in the thinking way through your machshava, in the understanding way with your mind, and the feeling way with your heart, or your emotions. So that's one way of how God, so to say, reveals himself in creation in a way that's understood, in a way that's felt. A second level of revelation, the the way God reveals himself above a chain of creation. Yesh mi'ayin, something from nothing. You don't understand the cause that created the effect. The yesh is the effect, the something, but we don't know where it's coming from. It's an ayin. It comes from nothingness, seemingly. Not because it doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from something that's not understood. Me'ayin hamuchlet, from something from absolute nothingness. V'hinei, when it's behishtalshlos ila v'ol, when it's in a situation of cause and effect, k'sha'olu miskarav li'ilase, so what happens? So there's a spectrum. The further the effect pulls away from the cause, the less it has a relationship with the cause. Where do we see that in a person? When a person's mind will trigger an emotional reaction, and then the emotion takes off on its own. Let's say in a negative way, anger, right? So that you could have something, an idea that got you upset. And once you're upset, sometimes you forget why you're upset. So it goes further away from the cause of why you're upset in the first place. That's an easy way to understand. But same thing in a positive way. When you have a feeling of love, you forget the reason why you feel the love. So that's when it's getting distant from each other. That's when the effect is getting distance from the cause. He says, but however, what happens when the cause goes back to the effect? Kesha'olu, the cause, let's say the emotional, let's talk about it in a positive way, an emotional response, miskarvli lasa gets closer to its cause. Why did it feel this way? Mimata l'mayla, going upwards, means officially it wants to go downwards, pushing towards thought. But what happens when it goes back towards its source, the intellect, let's say? So by understanding the cause, because it's closer to it, so it recognizes why it's feeling this way, why did the cause get created in the first place? That's the idea of mother understand, of mechin debina, the mother understanding. So then that causes happiness because you don't. It's not like you don't even you remember why you're here, and that revelation of the cause to the effect causes happiness. Kimshal ben Amel, he gives an example. Let's say in a more a physical way, you have a prince and a king. Shiatzam in Ashivya, that was taken captive. So it didn't change the fact. What's the cause and effect over here? Why is the son a prince? Because the father's the king. But when the son is taken into captivity, that doesn't change that the father's king. But that the fact that he's a prince now is much more concealed because he doesn't have the ability to express himself as a prince. What happens when he gets out of Shevya, he gets out of his captivity? When he sees his father, the king. So that's that when we understand that kind of joy that the prince and the king have in the uniting, the reuniting of themselves. So too, the cause of, let's say, the midos, the cause of that godliness that goes further down to the world, when it recognizes when the effect, recognizes its cause, there's a great simcha. Because before then it went down with a job, so to say, to reveal itself further down. And there was a distance between the effect and the cause. Means when the effect gets its own life, like I said, when the emotion takes over and doesn't even remember what the thinking process of why it feels this way. And it gets very distant in all kind of concealments. And when there's a revelation that it reconnects to its cause, and it goes, so to say, from darkness to light, that causes happiness. It understands what it's doing. It understands why it's here. It understands what created it. Again, in a positive way. In a negative way, you would try to fix it. And from mourning all the way to holiday. Mishibut, from captivity to the geula. So these are strong expressions of the distance the yesh has from the ila has from the alul. Ila is the effect, and the alul is the cause. That's the idea of holidays. We understand the setting of the house. The mother becomes happy. The mother of the children is happy. Pirush, ki akeres milashon akara. The word akeres, abayis, also means means the barren woman of the house. We've discussed this idea many times. How does the barren woman have children? But that's for another Mammar. But the idea of the barren, meaning the barren, is that she forgets that she has children. Ubelashin, like it says, kechulda zu hadar bikre batim. It says in Gemara Pesachim, a person feels. Sometimes the Jewish people tell God, I feel like the rat that's living in the basement of the house in the karei batim. No one wants me. So if at one point the effect feels so distant from its cause, doesn't even remember that it has a cause. It feels like a rat that no one wants. Doesn't understand that there's a purpose here because it forgets where it comes from. And then when it realizes its purpose, because it knows where it comes from, so it sees that there's a tachlis, there's a reason why it's here, that causes happiness. That the Rebbe continues, V'hi b'chinas malchus. This is the idea of what's called malchus. What's the idea of malchus? Malchus means the receptacle of all the midos, the receiving of all the, so to say, the character traits of the energy, and it has to bring that all those character traits further down in a way that conceals the source of why it feels this way, why it thinks this way, to be effective. Because the idea is always in the chain of creation is the reason why things have to be watered down and disconnected is in order for lower levels to receive it, it's too great of a light. And while you're being, so to say, watered down or mitzumtzum contracted, so you're also almost forgetting where you come from. And because of that, though you have a purpose, when you remember where you're coming from, and then you remember what your purpose is, so then there's a happiness. It says, "V'hi b'chinas malchus." This idea of malchus. Shemulubesh is called yamim dachal bebiyah. Malchus is a higher energy of godliness that, so to say, comes from a level of Shabbos, like the Shabbos clean, and then goes into the week. When you go into the week, it's hard to remember Shabbos. It's hard to remember that the idea of Shabbos is, the idea of the week is that there's a purpose here. That we take the energy of Shabbos and we bring it into the week. We make the mundane things that where you can't just close off your phones and your computers and your issues of life and turn it off to get close to Shabbos. You have to deal with those things, and then when you deal with those things, there's a distance and there's a disconnect and there's an anxiety and all that. So if you don't remember where you're coming from, it could cause stress. With klipas noga, you have to go out to the world. With klipas noga is the permissible. But Yom Tif, it goes back to its source, to the world of Atzilus. It's not in Biyah, it's not in the world of separation. Now she remembers that she's the mother of the children. In the level of a comprehension of what she understands. That there's a level of understanding, and again, understanding causes happiness. What one could understand, it's in a way that's understood. It means not that there's a great knowledge that comes down that's over our heads. We are in the level of godliness that's revealed. There's a tremendous revelation. And all that is revealed to us, again, in a way that we could accept it, and we're kind of distanced from our job. So we're focused, and therefore it causes happiness. That's what Yom Tif is. That's the spiritual understanding, and the way we actualize that today is by celebrating Yom Tif in a happy way. We're supposed to eat the foods that make us happy, drink the drinks that make us happy, get involved by clothing that make us happy. You realize that you were in darkness. It's like someone now you see great light. It's level of revelation that's grasped and understood. And there's a level of your origin, of the king, right? We're the soldiers, we're the emissaries of the king. But you recognize the king, and that causes happiness in who we are and in what we're doing, etc. And that's why Yom Tov is a very important part of our ability to be effective throughout the year. For example, and he gives how neshama shimsan eges ba'olam haba, right? When the soul takes joy in the world to come. Miziv Ashchina, there's much greater revelation there. Because before then, the soul was in the body. But now it's separated from the body in the world to come. And the world, and being in the body, it's like the effect being engaged, so to say, in the thinking, as opposed to remember where it's coming from. And it's separated from its source, now it goes back to its source. Shimsan Eges, now the soul is able to take pleasure in the Garden of Eden, and it takes pleasure from the ray of God. This is where it says about the world to come. I'm going to give an inheritance to those who I love, the righteous. Yesh, something. Why is it called yesh? That they're going to be able to, it's tangible, it's something that they understand. There'll be a revelation of something. Their soul will understand it. And understanding causes happiness. There's many reasons of the happiness. One is like the son who sees the king, kind of it means there's the appreciation of the change, and then there's the appreciation of the revelation. There's two levels of happiness. There's happiness to know that you're no longer being grasped and held in the darkness of this world, although there's a purpose for that darkness, but you're no longer there. And there's also a happiness because there's a revelation that you understand. So those two levels of happiness is the happiness of the world to come. And this is what it means when it says in the verse of Tehillim, "B'nahar yavru b'regel," by the river you fast, so to say, with your feet, also by the regel, by the holidays. Sham nischabai, then you'll have happiness. B'nahar hayotz me'eden, here we're talking about the river that leaves Eden. Shubina, the river is called understanding. Hu ha'aliyah b'chol regel mishleish regalim v'shamu makar simcha, goes up. Goes against the current, and the energy goes up, and there's happiness. Here we're understanding. We're trying to understand this. What the Alter Rebbe is giving us to understand is that there's happiness that comes from understanding, which is expression. Yesh, the problem of yesh, one of the so to say the vulnerability of bina. Bina is an understanding. but it also creates, that's why bin is the hey. Hey is a space. The yud is chachma, a dot. A dot has no expansion. The hey has expansion. Whenever you expand, the problem with expansion is if the expansion is not protected, it leaves vulnerabilities, like the hey has openings. It leaves vulnerabilities to ego or to the wrong levels of expression. That's the difference in the hey and the ches. That's why the difference in matzah and chametz. Ches doesn't have any space and doesn't know where to go out. Ches locks you in, and if you're locked in, it could be it's gonna be a bad energy. The hay has an exit to the top. So the idea is basically is that this is an expressed feeling, but expressed feelings are vulnerable. So in Yom Tif, that's Yom Tif. That's when Yom Tif they would send out guards around Jerusalem to make sure people didn't get too happy, and get inappropriate. But comes Shabbos is Chachma, and the idea of Matzah is to actually be able to connect to that Chachma, even though it's above our understanding, but there's a way to connect to that. That's the uniqueness of Matzah. That's basically the idea of the Mammar. So he continues. This is all the understanding of the mother. Bina, Olam Haba, for instance, like the world to come. Gan Eden, or the Garden of Eden, Gili, Taning, and Neshama's pleasure. Each person according to their understanding. What about the intellect of the Father? Chachma comes from the nothingness. Again, nothingness means above. It's so disconnected that it can't connect the dots of where it comes from. It's the inspiration, boom. In Chassidus, it's like the light bulb that pops up in your head of an idea that you don't know. You can't identify why you just came up with this idea. It's not like there's many components that led to this idea. You were thinking about an issue, but the idea part of the solution, let's say, just pops into your head. You don't know where it comes from. It's called ma'ayin timatz. It comes from nothingness. The idea I means what's not understood. Much greater than comprehension. So there's there's two levels here. On the one side, you're connected to higher. On the other side, there's no happiness, because happiness, we said, only comes from understanding. So he says the ma'ila being above understanding. The hainu shemizgal b'chinas orein soif baruchu ma'adeles machshavet tfisvay. There's a level of revelation. It's revealed to you, but it's not grasped. You can't grasp it. Tfisa means to grasp something. But if you can't grasp it, you can't take pleasure in it. You can't take pleasure because you don't grasp, you don't understand. So what does it mean? So what's the idea of it then? If it's not understood, it means the idea to because you don't have an angle on it, like the ches is a space, so it's bittul hasaga. You have to nullify your understanding. Nullify the soul, because you don't own that experience. You know it's there, it's great, but because you can't grasp it, the only way to connect it is to nullify yourself to it. That's what's revealed on Shabbos. Therefore we say, there's an expression brought down by the rabbis, that Shabbos is such a revelation of beyond their understanding that the rabbis were thinking about having people go silent on Shabbos. I have you know that there are people who actually practice that custom. They actually, they talk Torah, but they won't talk anything else. But the rabbis were even thinking about forbidding people to talk Torah on Shabbos. Torah is taken from Chachma. What's nafkes? It goes out of Chachma. Nafkas lavar goes outside. It's only a ray. Torah is only the ray that goes out of Chachma. But Shabbos is Chachma, so don't talk Torah. The essence of Chachma. It's much higher than that. It's even higher than Torah. And if Shabbos is being revealed, the level of the source of Torah, and that's the silence, so maybe we should be silent for 26 hours. At the end, the rabbis, of course, didn't institute that idea, but there was a thought of it. Therefore, there's no happiness. Because that revelation, he says, this revelation doesn't yield happiness. But timing and pleasure. Pleasure is from understanding what you could grasp. Like we said, you understand how you left darkness to great lightness. And that's why every holiday is connected to a story also. The revelation of Torah, the Sukkot says God did something. We give a reason to it. There's a revelation, there was an expression, there was a closeness of God to us, and we can understand it. Because in Yom Tov we recognize the light. שהוא בכינס ממעלה למעלה, ואחר שיובן שירד למטה למטה. הנה בעלויסה, ממטה למעלה, למעלה למעלה, תגלה שמחת מועד מועד. So when the light comes down and you go up, there's a revelation, you go towards the revelation. That causes happiness, but that's Yom Tov, not Shabbos. That's only the mother intellect. It's a level that you could grasp and understand. How it's above, and now you've went back to it. The inspiration that's not understood from that's the fatherly called intellect. It's a revelation that's above our understanding. There's no above and below. There's no levels. Levels have to have a starting point. You have to know that this. You have to be able to grasp something to go towards it. There's darkness and lightness are all the same. Even darkness is not dark, and light is as light as the darkness. Okay, let's skip the next few. We're going to skip now down to base. Okay, we're going to go to the left-hand side base. This is what it means. Ushmartes as a Shabbos. We have to keep the Shabbos because it's holy, it's sanctified. Shabbos itself is sanctified. It's an upper level of sanctification, the level of Chachma, Shabbos, the level. Kaddish also means it's separate. It's not tangible. It's Kaddish. It's separate from us. Shechina, the word Shechina, that we say, Shem Yechud Kudsha B'richu Shechinta, when we're connecting the Kudsha B'richu and the Shechina, Kudsha B'richu means how God is separate, the Sovev. Shechina is how God rests in the world. So this is Kaddish. Shabbos is Kaddish. Shabbos ki Kodeshi. It's holy. It's not even with the Vav. Vav would be Kodesh to be brought down. It's a concept of holiness. Mashenkin Yom Tov, Nikr Mikr Kodesh. Shabbos, it says Kodeshi. But Yom Tov says we call it Shabbos. It's only, we're calling a ray from holiness, which is called Netzach Chayid Yisai Abba. It's the active parts of the father intellect to go out in the midos. These are the midos of Netzach Chayid Yisod, the inner feelings of a person, the torso of a person, the arms of a person. That's your inner emotions. That's what you are. How do you bring it about? How do you express it? That's the lower three midos of Netzach Chayid Yisod. So this is the expression from wisdom of the Father, but it's not the wisdom itself. It gives it an inspiration. That means the Chachma gives feed into elevating the mother intellect, but it's enough of a feed to elevate it, inspire it, but also watered down enough for it to be understood. There has to be some of the fatherly intellect into the motherly intellect, even in the holidays. The mother intellect is not totally disconnected. It's not a totally disconnected understanding from the fatherly. They're one, like it says, like two friends that don't separate. From the nothingness, from the bittul of the fatherly love, fatherly understanding, it gives inspiration to the motherly, but it's like it's like a little dot in a room. We call it nekuda be'echalei. It's the focus point. It's the inspiration that's the focus point. It means when a person, bina is the whole point of bina is to understand things. But you have to be understanding something. So you get an inspiration. You don't know where the inspiration comes from, which is chachma, ma'ayin to matzah. But you have the idea now, and now you take the idea and you create facts based on the idea. You might say that's in business, right? You have an idea how to do something. So bina would be to turn it into a structure, to turn it to be functional, that we could use it for something. It's not just an idea that just sits there. How do we make it that to be an idea that make it practical? So that's bina. But it has connection to the Chachma, otherwise it's not working on anything. But it's not connected to the why of the Chachma. It just knows this is a great inspiration. Let's see if it works, and let's see if we can make it effective. So of course, there's that inspiration from Chachma that goes into Bina. This is the fact that we could, so in the feeling part of it, in how we, so to say, what we said, the happiness of it, it has to come from a level of godliness. It's not just coming from nowhere, but it's a level of godliness that can be understood. He says, it comes from a level that initially there's no grasping. It's not that we're taking pleasure in something that has nothing to do with God. It goes from the inspiration from Chachma, it develops into Bina a little bit, and that gives us enough to grasp and gives us happiness. The idea is that the little bit that's understood, although the initiation of the inspiration is a level of godliness that's beyond their understanding, but it comes into some form of understanding that gives us happiness. But there has to be mikra kodesh. What he's trying to explain is what's the idea of mikra kodesh. What does it mean that we're calling it holiness? The idea is that our happiness should be connected to something above us, but in a level that's a little bit understood. For instance, a person who calls to a friend, just like when you call someone, how do you call a person by their name? So he's giving a very interesting example. The example would be, for instance, if a person is not understood, but that person has a name, and you want to call that person. So the name, you know that the name will catch the attention of the person because he identifies or she identifies by the name. But it's not in the name doesn't have all the essence of the character of the person. It's just the, so to say, the identity of the person. And we spoke about this idea many times. So that's like Yom Tov, is Mikra Kodesh, you're calling the name. So you get almost the full product, but you're not getting an understanding of the person. It's only a ray from the person. Kachu Mikra Kodesh, that's the idea of calling Yom Tov. It's like calling the name. It's only a ray of the Father. So you have, so to say, the part of the energy of the Father intellect, which is beyond our understanding. It's the inspiration for the Mother intellect. And that's what feeds the holiness, so to say, Mikra Kodesh of Yom Tov. But it's all about us understanding and grasping it so it could yield happiness. The name of God is blessed. The idea of God giving a name to Torah, which is all the levels of the expression of Netzach Hod Yisod. Okay. Now, what we're going to go into now is to get into a little bit of Pesach, and we'll skip to understand the parts of Matzah. How do we bring happiness, this little ray of fatherly wisdom? How do we bring it into our Yom Tov to be the life force of us having happiness, special happiness in Yom Tov? Is why they tefillah v'halal, when we pray and we say the halal. But that's only rabbinical. The way we do it is through rabbinical, because the davening and halal is rabbinical. So we do through rabbinical. We bring the inspiration from above into our understanding to make us happy. But biblically, how do we do it? On Pesach by eating matzah. And it's a biblical, that's why Pesach is a biblical commandment to eat matzah. What we're going to understand over here is, that's why matzah has no taste. It's the chachma. Matzah is fatherly wisdom. In Chassidus, it's very, from the Alter Rebbe down, the power of matzah, it gives amuna. We don't know why. It gives belief. Just eating matzah gives a person belief. It gives refuah. It gives healing. We don't know why. Because matzah is like a tasteless bread. It's like that spark. It's the name of chachma. But we don't know anything about it. But it is it. Therefore, this, like the Rebbe once used to say, eating matzah is eating godliness. It's not like you're eating another food. There's no food in the world that's like matzah. When a person eats matzah, it's partially like you're eating God. You don't understand it. It's just like chachma is above our understanding. Eating matzah is above our understanding. And therefore he says, midiraisa, biblically, nimshach b'Pesach, how do we bring this joy, this higher level of chachma that's not understood, into some form of our existence? Is idei chilas matzah, by eating matzah. Shu katnis abba, this is, so to say, downgraded. Katnis from the word katan, small chachma. What does it mean small? It's everything there. There's nothing. You don't have it. You don't have no grasp in it. You can't understand the power of matzah. Ki matzah, what is matzah? Matzah is meichen abba. If you want to know a physical, it's mamish an amazing thing. When we talk about spiritual things, spiritual energies, and chachma, bina, all these terms of godliness. A matzah is a shtickle elikus. It's an expression. Matzah is a piece of godliness. Matzah is moichin abba. Matzah is fatherly intellect in the form of food. It's brought down. This is referring to the Jewish people, that a child cannot call out to its father until it tastes the taste of grain. Why? There's no explanation for that. Until it tastes grain, it doesn't have the understanding to the relationship of a child and a son. And even after he eats the grain, or she eats the grain, not like there's an understanding why now all of a sudden there's time to call out to the father, but all of a sudden the connection starts. Because you're eating something, when you eat grain, grain has within it that idea that starts developing, that you're connected to something higher. The grain over here we're talking about is matzah. When we start calling out to our Father, God, Amunah gets connected. A person has belief in our Father, in his or her Father, in Hashem, is because you're eating a shtick of godliness. You're eating a piece of godliness when you eat matzah. This idea that a child knows the call its father, so to say, by eating grain. It's not an understood idea. It's not because the bread all of a sudden, the grain all of a sudden gives an understanding to the child that this is my father. If you don't all of a sudden understand what does it mean a father, how you came about, etc. The child's too small for that. So too matzah. There's no taste to matzah. There's no elevation. It's just concentrated godliness. It's above our understanding. It's the level of chachma. It's brought down in so to say, just like the inspiration of chachma goes into bina to give us happiness, it comes into kindness. It's brought down into a piece of matzah, and that's why the Zohar calls matzah mechla demnusa, a food of emunah. It means there's no other food, there's no other physical thing in the world that has the power of matzah, because matzah literally, there's nowhere else does it say. And any foods that you would eat, that eating this food is pashut, you're feeding emunah to yourself. It's a food of emunah. Again, it's because chacham is not understanding. It's above our understanding. The whole idea is to connect to something above our understanding. If a person says, I need to understand matzah, then you're not getting what matzah is. You don't need to understand matzah. You just do matzah. Eat it. That's the whole point. You're not meant to understand matzah. It's above your understanding. This idea that there's a fatherly, that you're bringing down chachma when a person eats matzah. So that's only the first night. The first night by the Seder, by us, the first and second night. In Chutzlah, it's the first and second. It means to say the first night means the first night of Yom Tov. When we eat the Seder matzah, that's the mitzvah. That's the idea of Moichan Abba. It's a matzah, is eating the Moichan Abba, eating the chachma is the first night. Av Misham ve'elach going forward. Though it says matzah is ye'echel eis shivas. You should meet. Actually translated, matzah should be eaten, should be given to be eaten on Reb Shimon, on all the 7 days of Pesach. But the idea is to feed the 7 days of Passover with the energy of Chachma. We know that in the Sfiros, the 7 days of Pesach, and if for all 7 days you can't eat leaven, you have to eat matzah. You don't have to eat matzah. You can't eat leaven. When one eats matzah to feed, so to say, the experience. So the experience itself, the connection itself is the first night. And we have the ability to take it and feed it through the remaining 7 nights. Bring that bittul, above our understanding, the connection to God in every one of the emotions. See, what's the importance of this? In avodah. In avodah, this is very important. The idea of matzah is very important. Because matzah is eating chachma. What's really chachma? Chachma is, again, a level of godliness that's beyond your ability to understand, not your actual understanding. It's above your ability to understand. And so therefore, what's your connection to it? Bittul. You nullify yourself to that connection. Matzah, you're pasha eating godliness, and when you bring it into the other midas, that every emotion you have, your expression of chesed, your expression of gvura, of beauty, of being active, everything should be connected to that bittul. Why do I love God? So it's yes, you have a heart, try to understand God as much as you can. But that's not the basis of it. That's not the foundation of it. It's an expression of it. The foundation is bittul. When you have, that's the idea of nekuda beichale. The idea of chachma in every midah means that fundamentally the connection of my love is not based on my understanding. I understand as much as I could understand, but when I reach beyond my understanding, I don't stop loving. Or if I can't get to the understanding, I don't not love. My love is because I love. All the love I have is for God. If I'm a person that can love, it's for God. And and even when you're loving other people, what you have to, obviously Yisrael, obviously Hashem is based on obviously Yisrael. And of course, in relationships, the people that you love, it's real love, but it's not separate from a godly love. You know, we say there's three components to every child: the father, the mother, and God. So so the idea of eating matzah in every one of the 7 days of Pesach is to bring that bittul. So the actual first night is connecting to the bittul. You're eating godliness, you're eating chachma, you're eating moichin da'ava, you're eating gamuna, and then take that unconditional connection to God and bring it into every expression of yourself, of your character, of the 7 midos. That's what it means to take Shebeshvua Rishon in Zayin Moichin Da'ava. You take the chachma and bring it into every one of the midos. So that's the idea. That's the whole idea of Pesach. And in order, the point is, in order that experience should be protected, one avoids chametz. You in that initial first week of transforming yourself to a vessel of bittul, of self-nullification in all your expression, in all of who you are, you need to be very cautious to do it in a way that's protected. That's what's called shmur matzah, right? Protected matzah. What's shmur matzah mean? Protected. What are we protecting from? You have to protect from ego. You have to protect from chametz. So in throughout the years, when we do Pesach, that whole experience has to be protected. When the Jewish people left Egypt, all they needed was the first night to have that connection. And the power of Moshe and Aaron was so great that there was no real concern of chametz. It just technically there was no chametz. Why was there no chametz? They left Egypt, but there was no, the chametz part of it. The fact means that what the Alter Rebbe asked initially in the question, the Mammar, that how could you that from the pasuk it seems that they rushed out of Egypt, so there was no time for it to become leaven. But had they stayed a little 5 more minutes, he would have had bread, not matzah. It's because it wasn't important. The concern of chametz is ego. That ego, this expansion, would expand into the wrong way and give feed to the wrong feelings. Wasn't a concern when Moshe and Aaron were there, but that's only that year. After that, we need, in order to start working on ourselves, which is the 49 days of the Omer. So the first week, we need to have it in such a way, and even before we start counting the Omer, because the first night, we don't count the Omer. But to feed into the Omer is to have that unconditional bittul, and we have to protect that transition or that awakening to such a way that we should be able to, we shouldn't have a concern of chametz, of ego, and therefore we avoid anything that could be egotistic. We don't need bread. So that's what he's saying over here. When it comes to the Pesach of Egypt, therefore, we only had to be concerned about not eating chametz one day. Moshe and Aaron were there. There were two figures, the personalities of Moshe and Aaron together protected the Jewish people from the negative things that could happen from chametz. They are representatives of this bittul. Right? They say, who are we? They were people who represented matzah, of that total absolute connection to chachma. They didn't leave from the cloud, didn't leave from the tabernacle. Anon and the Aaron, these are the clouds of Aaron, the presence. What's the idea that didn't leave? The focus. The focus didn't leave. The nekuda be'echala, the dot in the room. When you expand and you forget the source, so then you could get things to go astray. This is an encompassing energy of the focus of Chachma, of Abba. And the cloud was so powerful of that focus that it killed all bad energy. Snakes, scorpions, anything that was trying to attack a person. The snake, we learned the snake and the scorpions in the desert represent the different passions of a person. Snake is the hot passion, the akrav is the coldness of a person. So all those things that try to attack a person while they're trying to work on themselves. The Anoni Kovid was a force that rid the Jewish people of these things, didn't allow it to come into their space. It blinds the eyes of negativity of the external and negative forces. That they shouldn't try to siphon off energy from your avodah of bina. It was enough for them to connect essentially to the matzah the first night, right away to connect in such a way that they have chachma, and afterwards there was no concern of chametz. It just technically there was no chametz. Aval adayres, that's only Moshe and Aaron there with us. But adayres in the generations afterwards, zayin yom teich matzah, you have to eat matzah those 7 days. You need to feed that chachma. It's not a given that you're going to have that bittul in everyone when you're starting to, because you see when what happens in the Seder Omer, we're starting to open ourselves up, right? When a person's closed up, everything's closed. You know, they say a lot of drinks, shake before you drink. Right? What's the idea of shake before you drink? You have to mix everything up. A lot of things fall to the bottom. Things have to be mixed up. You want the full experience. So when everything's closed up, there's less concern. When the things get vulnerable, when you start opening yourself up, you start opening up your emotions. Who am I? You're trying to find it. You have to find yourself because you have to fix yourself. You can't ignore it anymore. That's Seder Omer. And when you're fixing yourself, you're vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, a lot of negative forces that are unidentified can attack you, and you think that you could even think they're positive forces. So therefore, when it comes to this doiris, when it comes to the generations afterwards, today, when we're sitting here tonight, this year Pesach, 5,780, 2025, and we start eating the matzah. That's literally an idea of eating godliness, eating chachma, eating amunah, and then we take that energy and we want to start building on the Seder Omer. We need 7 days to feed that bittul into every one of the midas. At least, even if you're not biblically commanded to eat matzah, you definitely can't eat chametz in those 7 days. There shouldn't be any siphoning off of corrupted energy. As long as you eat the first night, that's biblically, you must eat matzah. But while you're developing yourself, the idea is to try to feed the matzah into the 7 days. If you're not going to eat matzah, at least don't eat. You have to avoid chametz. Shekavui that it's been commanded. Akas of chayva, it's an obligation. God commanded His kindness. He wants this expression. Anan the Aaron, the idea of the clouds of Aaron, like it says, that in day in Chesed, that the idea of Aaron's Chesed is to bring down this level of Chachma. The first day has all the energy. Therefore, you must eat matzah the first day. That's bringing down to connect us to Chachma. And the idea is then to continue eating matzah if you can, feeding that idea into the weeks or while you're in the 7 days, or definitely avoiding matzah, chametz. Let's go a little further, and then we're going to just do a little bit of this gimel, and I'm going to skip to the end of the Mammar. We have 13 minutes left. So what do we get from all this? Kibeiz matzah same. There's 2 levels of matzah basically. Matzah lal rishon chayva. There's the biblical obligation of connecting to chachma, eating matzah. Now again, in Chutz La'aretz, when we say the obligation of eating matzah, we mean in Chutz La'aretz, in outside of Eretz Yisrael. We have 2 sedarim. It's both seders. The only difference is the Zohar says that the level of matzah that is like eating godliness and feeding an actual food of something. So the first night is amunah, the second night is refuah, is healing. So the Alter Rebbe literally would give people matzah for healing. If someone was sick, he would give them matzah. Matzah is a food of healing. So it says, so this biblical commandment is the matzah shalai rishon is chayv. It's biblical. You must connect to the chachma. Matzah shakol yimei pesach, and the rest of the matzah is the second level of matzah. Matzah the rest of the 7 days. On the second level, it says that the reason we eat the matzah is because there was no time for the bread to become leavened. They rushed out. Meaning to say, like we said before, they didn't need the matzah for the 7 days that they should avoid chametz. They could have eaten chametz, technically. They just didn't eat chametz because it didn't work out, but they had Moshe and Aaron. Why didn't they need the shmirah, the watching? They had such revelation. The revelation was so great that there was no concern of what the matzah had to do to protect that space. So we have the matzah that's the connection, and the idea of the matzah that's really, we're eating the matzah to continue, so to say, the moichin into the midos, and mainly when we're working on ourselves not to be affected by the ego. Okay, now let's skip to the end of the Mammar. Goes into the rest of the Mammar that we're missing out over here. He goes into what was this revelation of Melech Malchim Lachem HaKadosh Baruch. I want to just finish off in the practical part. It's like I said, it's a big Mammar. The practical part of the matzahs. Okay. It says like this. We're talking about, let's start top page 28. So we're talking like that's about the idea, the power of the revelation of Chachma. It says like this, in Kol Makom, top page 28. When can a person start working on themselves? Is when you have matzah, both the matzah and the maror, the bitterness of our reality. Right? We're bitter about the things we've done, or the distance that we are distant, even if we're not doing any sin, but just being distant, just being so preoccupied. What does distance mean? Distance is a matter of hakara, of mindset. You're distant. Where's your focus? So if you're focused on other things, then you're distant from godliness. There's a bitterness to that. Even though you feel like I have no choice, I'm out to work, I have to go out to the world, I have to be interacting, or sometimes even in avoda, I have to go engage in things that are worldly, to engage in teaching, I have to go engage in elevating, gathering children, telling them about godliness, and that time I'm involved in worldly things. So there's a lot of reason why there's maror, why there's bitterness. In this world now, when you have to do things, when you can make a choice. We have choices. And God says, choose life. So the Arizal says, Marar, what is bitterness? What is the marar that we eat? It's gematria mavis, the same a number value as death. Why? Reish and Reish is 200, so together is 400. The letter for 400 is the Saf, and then you have the Mem and Vav. So Marar and Mavis are the same number value, 446. What does it mean, death? That doesn't mean death. But anything physical, anything that's not godly, in an open way, is death. It doesn't last, right? No matter what you do in this world, it doesn't last. A person, when you go to the world to come, they're not going to say how much money you made. They say how many mitzvahs did you do. Only holiness, only spirituality is what's really life and good. Therefore, a person feels bitter. And there's merirus. Why am I chasing death the whole time? I'm chasing something that is not sustainable. It's not going to last forever. The neshama lasts forever. The soul lasts forever. But the 120 years, you choose what your focus is when you're here in this world. When your soul's in a body, it could chase life or it could chase death. And you're bitter because you just feel like you're just being drawn, so saying, sucked into chasing life, chasing gashmis the whole time, physical, material. You really should be choosing life. But when could you have that choice of choosing something, feeling bitter, struggling with it? That's only in this world. Mashiach comes. There's going to be no death. Death is going to be rid when Mashiach comes. It's not that there's going to be no physical. The physical is no longer going to be hidden in mundane. The Gashmis itself is going to be holy. But the choice, the bechira, the choice that you have, that what's your focus is not going to be there anymore, because it's all going to be godliness. That's what it means that Hashem is going to wipe away tears when Mashiach comes. Dima, the word Dima is the number value of 120, which is the 120 ways of Elohim. Elohim is concealment. God is going to wipe away concealment. That's where concealment comes. That Havaya is going to be Elikim. That what's that mean? Havaya is going to be Elikim. There's two ways to understand that, like we've learned in Parshas Vayetze. Either that Havaya, the Yud Kei Vav Kei, is going to be what today is my reality, meaning to say there's going to be higher levels of revelation, or that my reality today that is a struggle, that's concealment. We're going to see that Havaya. We're going to see godliness in that. Like it says, the sun is going to come out of its concealment. There's no more Mammar. So to say, Mammar there's a positive to Mammar, right? We all look at Mammar as a bad thing, the bitterness. But bitterness means there's a choice. You can only be bitter when there's something to be bitter about. Bitter, what's by definition bitterness? Bitterness has to be where there's something that could have been, and you're bitter that it's not, or it didn't happen, or something horrible happened. But it has to be choices. Bitter, more by definition, requires a choice. Not a choice that you have to make of, a choice of how things could have been. In our case, it's the bechira. If you could choose something that seems to be non-godly, so you're bitter that you made that choice. Again, it doesn't have to be a virus. It could be what your focus in life. Why are you bitter? Because you had a choice to choose life, and you chose death. You chose things that are not sustainable. Because there's not going to be any more death, like we said before, and therefore there's going to be no reason for bitterness. Everything's going to be both spiritual, both physical. There's going to be one. So too, this idea that matzah, which is absolute godliness, has to be protected, it's only now. It only has to be protected when there's something to be protected from. Any shach, idea of shmur matzah is any shach rak achshav, only today. I will also love him when the Mashiach comes. It's going to be like in the days of when we left Egypt, that technically it couldn't become chametz. The Rebbe goes into. It's not just that it technically didn't become chametz. It couldn't become chametz. You only need to watch something when something could happen. Watch because something could. Watch the children, something could happen. Watch the sheep, something could happen. When you're watching something, as you're watching from something that can happen. Means it couldn't happen. Moshe and Aaron were standing there. There was no room for there was no vulnerability at that moment for chametz. She after loving the chametz. The yesh gashmi klal machna bittul. The bittul was so strong. The connection to God, to the chachma, was so strong that they were able to penetrate that and bring that into all their character without being concerned that they have to watch the chachma to protect it, that they shouldn't lead to a feed of negativity. Or you could say means there's two ways to look at it. One is, like I said before, there's always two ways to look at something. One way is that there's no ego. The other way is there's no unhealthy ego. Ego is the reason why ego is an issue is because an ego has in it a component that is unhealthy. It's selfish. It becomes a slave to your nefesh bahamas, to your animal, faster than it becomes, more likely than it would become a slave or a servant to your godly soul. And because the most likeliness is that the ego is an unhealthy ego and becomes a servant and a slave to the animal soul, therefore you have to watch chametz. However, when Mashiach comes, ego itself will be elevated. There will be you don't need to protect yourself from your own ego, because ego can only be an expression of maximizing my experience with God in a 100% way, not just in a makeshift way, in a person who's very godly and stepping on everyone else. Chametz itself won't be dangerous. Chametz won't be an expression of unholy feelings. Klipa means the unholiness. My heart is going to grow and expand in its service of God. Like we have the carbon of thanks, when there's a point when a person really thanks God. They were able to give leavened bread in the sacrifice because it was such an open expression of gratitude that you didn't feel any self there. But in a negative way. All the other sacrifices be nullified besides the one that we give for thanks. All the other ones have matzah, unleavened bread, because you have to protect when you're doing a carbon. When you become close to God, you have to be very careful that doesn't turn into an ego experience, an ego trip. When you come in to give gratitude to God. When they brought this Shtei Lechem after you worked on the 49 days of the Omer, when you're so preoccupied in working on your character, those are the times that a person's ego is protected. If you want to just analyze and finish off over here, the idea of why is the Toda leavened bread and we're not concerned, is because the whole point of giving acknowledgement is an expression of bit, right? When a carbon itself is to be close to God, you have an agenda. Yes, a very holy agenda. It's agenda. And then when you have that agenda, you must have matzah. because you must make sure that that agenda doesn't become unhealthy. But the very fact that you're coming here to say thank you, the very fact that you're acknowledging that there's a reason to say thank you, is itself an expression of bittul. And that expression of bittul is why, possibly why they brought chametz to fully experience the thankfulness, because you're at a moment that you're not vulnerable to ego, because the whole point of why you're here is acknowledging God. So imkain is thanking God, and thank you is an expression of bittul. Is gratitude. Is imkain. When Mashiach comes, even the chametz is going to be elevated. And he finishes off the famous idea that he says that today the matzah is an expression of all of that. When we eat the matzah today, it's both an expression of connecting to the chachma, and also the expression of protecting our ego, elevating our ability to serve. I mean, it's not just the feed to take, but it's also the experience of the non-chametz aspect of it, of connecting to the bittul part of it. All right, this is we're not going to be able to learn again over Pesach, so this is the only Mammar we're going to learn on Pesach. So I want to wish everyone to remember that matzah is a holy food. There's nothing like matzah that exists. And remember, when you eat the matzah and you make the bracha the first night, you pashut eating alikus, you're eating godliness, you're eating amuna, you're eating chachma. It's mamish, it's an experience. Don't just gobble it down, take it in, concentrate. It's the ability for our physical self to mamish connect on the highest level in a physical way with godliness. Laila tov, everyone, and Freilich and Pesach.
Thank you, Rabbi.